How many people around your age do you know who have smoked marijuana?
Almost, I would say like 9 out of 10
Really?
students. Yeah,
Is
9
that
out of 10.
prevalent?
Yeah, definitely.
Now that it's legal, everybody's just getting it.
Welcome back to Straight Talk. I am Adrienne Batra. In just a few short years ago, in two states, in Colorado and Washington State, in referendums that they had, they legalized marijuana. Well, just last week, to ring in 2014, the state of Colorado has now officially began to sell marijuana. There are a number of retailers that are sanctioned by the state government there in order to provide legal marijuana to the consumers, whomever wants to buy it. Interestingly, one of the first people in line was a retired Marine who wanted to purchase it to help him with his PTSD. So with this debate carrying on, and of course in our own backyard here in Canada, the leader of the third party, the Liberal leader, Justin Trudeau, is really the only policy he can talk about is whether or not marijuana should be legalized in Canada. We are going to look at a number of sides of this debate. And joining us from our Vancouver studio is Sun News Network contributor Paige McPherson, and in our studio here with me is Marissa Semkiw. Ladies, thank you very much for being here. We all, I think, maybe not get to the debate in a different direction, but what I think is important for everybody to note at home is that anybody who is sort of center-right, conservative, libertarian, they all think that we come at this from the same perspective, that, oh, won't somebody please think of the children, and that there isn't a more thoughtful opportunity to debate this. So I want to start with you, Paige. You are very much of the libertarian mind when it comes to legalization and softening our marijuana laws here in Canada.
Yeah, that's absolutely true. And for me, this issue is quite easily summed up. And this, I believe that I am of the conservative position here. I think it comes down to a few basic things: individual freedom and responsibility, and then government reach and government spending. Unfortunately, when it comes to this policy, this is one of many examples that bad policy makes for good politics. I mean, pot prohibition in Canada was put in place for reasons that are absolutely absurd and hysterical at the time, early in the 1900s, and really, I believe, have been kept in place by advocates of this extension of the nanny state, and really by people who are their sensibilities are offended by marijuana use, and that's really why they think that it should be criminalized. And I don't think that's a very conservative position. I think you should leave it up to the individuals and decrease the size of government on this issue and so many others. All
right, Marissa, there has been a lot of discussion, of course, as of late, as to what Canada should do. We've heard from Canada's Defence Minister, Peter MacKay, Justice Minister Peter MacKay. He has said that we need to sort of, quote, modernize what we do in this country. What say you?
Well, listen, I think that there's sort of an inherent contradiction in the libertarian argument, which is we don't want government control, the government to determine whether or not I'm allowed to smoke marijuana. And yet what would happen if you do legalize marijuana is you would inevitably see an increase in government regulation. What we saw in Colorado, which is a very good example, is essentially they don't have enough supply to meet the demand, and so a number of these retail stores are actually closing down. So what we're going to look at, of course, is an increase in prices, an increase in the number of people, of course, that are purchasing this, and the government is going to have to respond to the situation in Colorado. And so again, going back to this sort of inherent contradiction, is we're saying, no, we don't want the government to intervene in our decision to smoke marijuana, but at the end of the day, the government will have to then implement greater regulations to deal with the inevitable outcomes of what would occur if you do legalize marijuana.
I don't see that as a contradiction. I simply see that as a point of fact. I mean, you've got one side page saying, look, government, get out of my way. I don't, as far as even we just saw 2 weeks ago with the Supreme Court of Canada and our prostitution laws ostensibly being, they have to be rewritten now. I mean, it's that viewpoint of if you're going to do something in your personal life, the libertarian view, Paige and Marissa, of course, is as long as it's not harmful to somebody else. That's the libertarian view on it, Paige.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, essentially, this is a victimless crime that we're talking about here. It's something that people choose to put in their body, and what basically the libertarian argument, and I believe the conservative argument should be, is that the government has no place in that. And I only would agree that it would increase regulation and government reach if you don't believe that legislation and incarceration of people who are involved in the criminalization of this are, if that is an arm of government, which of course it it is. And I do want to quote the National Review, of course, a conservative magazine in the United States who did actually just endorse legalization. They had a really good quote in their editorial where they said, "We make a lot of criminals while preventing very little crime." And they also spoke to the fact that we actually do a great deal of harm to prevent the use of something that actually causes very little harm. And I believe that that is argument enough that whatever government needs to be involved, and I would argue that actually Colorado is a pretty good case. Of course, it's a brand new market there, and I have faith in the free market. I think that it'll be able to sort itself out. But that actually is, you know, the government isn't selling it. It's actually retail stores, and that's a great way to have the government very less involved than they would be in the criminalization of this as they currently are in Canada.
Thanks, Paige. Marissa, you have actually just done a pretty in-depth and incredible piece on, I mentioned prostitution laws in Canada just earlier, and within that, the argument will always be, well, someone has to think of the children. Someone has to think of what a legalization of marijuana in Canada, for example, could look like. What could it look like? You've spent some time out, and there have been some pretty sketchy characters that you encountered, but even from the parents' perspective, I mean, I certainly don't want my son going out there and you know, smoking weed because of you know, it might make him lazy or may make him tired. It might make him perform. But there's got to be some sort of rational middle ground here at some point where we as a society can capitalize on the tax benefit of it, because as Paige rightly mentioned in that National Review editorial they wrote earlier just today, I believe, we are criminalizing people and we're spending billions with little in return. There's got to be some middle ground, right?
I think the middle ground, Adrienne, would be decriminalization, not legalization. What we see is when you legalize something, you see an increase in the number of people partaking in that. And of course, as we all know, there are various health side effects of smoking marijuana, especially at an early age. So you don't want children to get their hands on it. But the other thing, too, is when you legalize it, essentially what we've seen is in Colorado, because the supply can't meet the demand, these stores are closing. So what we're seeing now is prices are going to have to increase because they can't actually produce as much marijuana as is being requested. And so again, that is obviously one of the major side effects of legalizing marijuana. If you decriminalize, and I understand the argument which Paige is putting forward, is you don't want to put someone who's caught with a joint of marijuana in jail. If you just decriminalize it, it'll deal with that situation rather than legalizing it, reducing the stigma, and giving more people access to marijuana.
Well, we probably should have allocated a little bit more time to this one, Marissa and Paige, but unfortunately, we do have to leave it there. And since I'm the one in the middle in the box for everybody at home, I will get the last word on this. I think that our country needs to very seriously look at modernizing whatever it is we have on the books, because the fact is, not only could we use the tax revenue, but my concern, of course, and I know this is one thing, Paige and Marissa, you would agree on, putting this in the hands of the government, that's where I get very nervous about anything. If the private sector is going to do it, let them do it. We do have to leave it there, but I appreciate you joining us. Paige McPherson is our Sun News contributor in Vancouver, and of course you see Marissa Simke with us here. She follows social media, and she is our Sun News contributor in our Toronto studio.